All right, ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something we all use every day without even realizing it.
It really is fascinating, folk psychology.
Yeah, it's how we understand each other's actions.
Predict what someone might do?
Right, and basically how we navigate this whole social world, right? You and me,
Yeah,
everyone, we're all constantly reading each other's minds in a way.
it's true. I mean, we just take it for granted. It's like breathing. But we don't often stop to actually think about how we do it.
Exactly.
So today we're going to unpack one of the most influential explanations for this whole mind-reading magic.
That's right.
We're talking about theory.
Now, you might be thinking, theory, like in science?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not a bad place to start.
Okay.
Theory, often shortened to just TET, proposes that we understand others by using a theory of mind. It's almost like a scientific theory, but specifically about how minds work.
That's interesting. So you're saying our understanding of other people is structured like a theory. In a way, yeah. It's like a scientist uses a theory to predict and explain, let's say, physical phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
We use our theory of mind to predict and explain behavior.
Okay, I see.
We attribute mental states, things like beliefs and desires,
Right.
to make sense of what people do. For example, you might think, if my friend believes the traffic will be bad, she'll probably want to leave early, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're making a prediction based on what we think is going on in her head.
But are these models based on, like, actual laws of how minds work? Like, like the laws of physics? Is it really that systematic?
That's where things get really interesting. Not all proponents of theory agree on how literally we should take this theory idea. Some believe that our folk psychology actually reflects real, causal mental entities, beliefs, desires, intentions.
Okay.
These things actually existing in the mind. This is what we might call the heavy-duty version of theory.
Yeah, so there's this idea that there's actually something real in the mind.
Right.
That corresponds to these terms that we use.
Exactly.
Okay, so I can see that, but I can also see how it might be more of a useful tool, like a shorthand, right? Just a way to navigate social situations without it actually mirroring the ultimate reality of the mind.
Exactly. A great example is Dennett's intentional stance. He argues that even treating a thermostat as if it has beliefs and desires
Oh, interesting.
can be a surprisingly effective way to predict its behavior. Like you might say it wants to keep the room at this temperature,
Right.
even though we know it doesn't actually want anything in a conscious sense.
Yeah, it's just a metaphor, right?
It is, and this is more of a light-duty approach to theory. It's saying that the theory is useful,
Right.
even if it doesn't necessarily reflect the deep reality of what's going on.
And this is making me think, like, what about AI, right? We're interacting with increasingly sophisticated machines.
Yeah.
Are we starting to treat AI as if it has beliefs and desires? I mean, I know I kind of do.
It's a great point. The line between what we consider minded and not minded is always evolving.
Right.
And this is part of why theory is so relevant.
Yeah.
But let's add another layer here.
Oh, no.
There are actually 3 different flavors of theory.
Yeah.
Each with its own take on how this theory of mind works.
So not only are there these different levels of how seriously we should take theory,
Right.
but then there are different types of the theory itself.
Exactly.
This is already getting pretty complex.
Don't worry, we'll break it down. These 3 flavors are often called modular theory,
Okay.
scientific theory,
Uh,
and model theory. We'll unpack each one, and you can decide which one resonates with you.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Let's start with modular theory.
Okay.
This view suggests that our brains have specialized modules, almost like dedicated little computers, for understanding minds.
Okay.
Each module might be responsible for processing specific types of social information.
Like what?
Things like detecting intentions, recognizing emotions, or understanding beliefs.
So it's like we have built-in mind-reading hardware. Fascinating.
It is, but then that raises the question, are we born with a fully developed theory of mind? Or do these modules, develop over time?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's the classic nature versus nurture debate,
Right.
but applied to our mind-reading abilities.
Exactly.
Some argue these modules are innate, like a product of evolution, hardwired in.
Makes sense.
While others believe they're shaped by experience and learning.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like both nature and nurture play a role in so many aspects of human development.
Right.
I'm guessing it's probably the same here. But if these models are shaped by experience, wouldn't we see more variation in how people understand minds?
That's a great point, and we do see some differences across cultures.
Oh, really? Like what?
For example, there are some Samoan communities where it's considered difficult, even taboo, to speculate about other people's thoughts and feelings.
Wow, interesting.
This suggests that our cultural background might actually influence which aspects of mind reading we prioritize,
I see.
or even which ones we find acceptable.
It makes you wonder if this whole concept of a theory of mind is a Western thing, right? Like, maybe it's shaped by, our individualistic culture.
It's an interesting thought for sure, but let's move on to the second flavor of theory.
Oh, yeah.
Scientific theory.
All right.
This one paints a pretty interesting picture of kids.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine toddlers as tiny scientists,
Okay.
constantly running experiments, gathering data,
Uh-huh.
and revising their hypotheses about how minds work.
Oh, wow.
They observe people's actions, listen to what they say,
Right.
and try to make sense of it all.
It make those seemingly random questions kids ask, like, seem a lot more profound.
Right.
Like, they're actually gathering data for their grand theory of the human mind.
Exactly.
So what kind of evidence supports this view?
Think about those developmental milestones like understanding false beliefs.
Okay.
This usually emerges around age 4 and is considered a key indicator of a more sophisticated theory of mind developing.
Can you remind us what false beliefs are all about?
Of course. A classic experiment called the Sally-Ann test demonstrates this beautifully. Imagine 2 dolls, Sally and Ann.
Okay.
Sally puts her marble in a basket and leaves the room.
Okay.
While she's gone, Anne moves the marble to a box.
Sneaky.
When Sally returns, where will she look for her marble?
Well, in the basket, obviously. That's where she put it.
Exactly. But children younger than 4 often say Sally will look in the box.
Oh, interesting.
They haven't yet grasped that Sally can hold a belief that's different from reality, a false belief.
So they haven't grasped that just because they know where the marble is, Sally doesn't.
Right. Around age 4, however, they start to understand that Sally's actions will be guided by her belief,
Right.
even if it's incorrect.
It's amazing how something that we consider so basic now
Totally.
was once a major hurdle, like cognitively, for kids.
It really is. But there's a bit of a paradox here.
A paradox. How so?
Well, some studies suggest that infants, even as young as 1 year old,
Wow, that young.
might actually show some sensitivity to others' beliefs, but only using nonverbal tasks.
Interesting.
This has led to what's called the developmental paradox.
Okay.
If babies already have some grasp of minds, why does it take until age 4 for them to consistently pass those explicit false belief tests?
That is a good question. Are we misinterpreting those early signs from babies?
Possibly. Or maybe there are different levels of understanding when it comes to theory of mind.
Yeah, I could see that.
There are a few potential explanations within theory. Some propose that young children have like a basic implicit theory of mind,
Okay.
but it takes time for them to develop the cognitive skills needed to succeed in those more complex tests.
So like the language skills, memory, self-control.
Exactly.
So maybe their concept of belief isn't changing.
Right.
It's more their ability to articulate it and apply it in different situations.
Exactly. Others suggest there might be different levels of theory of mind. Infants might have a simpler, more intuitive grasp of goals and intentions,
Oh.
while older children develop a more explicit understanding of representations and beliefs.
So there's like a hierarchy of theory of mind abilities.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move on to the last flavor, model theory.
All right, this one takes a slightly different approach.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of focusing on, rules or modules, model theory proposes that we understand others by creating these flexible mental models,
Okay.
almost like simulations of their minds.
Simulations.
Yeah, like we try to step into their shoes and imagine how we would think and feel in their situation,
Okay.
given what we know about their beliefs and desires.
So instead of having like a fixed set of rules for interpreting behavior,
Right.
we use our own minds as a template.
That's the idea.
It's a pretty intuitive idea, actually.
Yeah, it aligns with the whole idea of predictive processing.
Mhm.
A theory in cognitive science that suggests our brains are constantly predicting and updating their model of the world,
Right.
including the social world.
So we're not just passively observing.
Right.
We're actively trying to anticipate what people will do next based on our body of their minds.
Exactly.
This is making me think about how subjective all of this must be, right?
Totally.
I mean, if we're using our own minds as a model,
Yeah.
doesn't that introduce all sorts of biases and assumptions into how we understand other people?
That's a really important point, and it actually leads us to some of the critiques of theory.
Okay.
But before we dive into those, let's take a quick detour into the world of neuroscience.
Oh, fun.
What's actually happening in our brains when we engage in this mind reading? Well, neuroscience has actually revealed some interesting clues about the brain regions involved in theory of mind.
Oh, like what?
One area that consistently lights up during mind reading tasks is the temporoparietal junction,
Okay.
or TPJ for short.
TPJ. So is this like a dedicated mind reading module in the brain? Like the ones proposed by modular theory theory?
It's tempting to think so,
Yeah.
but it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
While the TPJ is certainly involved in understanding other minds,
Right.
it also plays a role in other cognitive processes, things
Ah.
like attention shifting and perspective taking.
I see.
It's more like the TPJ is part of a larger network of brain regions all working together.
So it's not just one spot.
Right, it's more complex than that.
It seems like every time we think we found a simple answer,
Right.
the brain throws us another curveball. Okay, so we've explored these different flavors of theory,
Yeah.
the developmental milestones, the
Yep.
neuroscience. I'm ready to hear about those critiques you mentioned.
All right.
Are there any serious contenders to theory's dominance?
Absolutely. Let's start with a radical one, eliminativism.
Okay, eliminativism. Lay it on me.
This view argues that folk psychology, with its talk of beliefs, desires, intentions,
Yeah.
is fundamentally flawed
Hmm.
and will eventually be replaced by a more scientifically accurate understanding of the mind.
Wait, so you're saying we should just ditch all those terms we use to understand each other, like beliefs, desires, all that?
That's what eliminativists argue, yeah.
That seems a bit extreme, doesn't it? I mean, how else would we make sense of human behavior?
They argue that just as science has replaced other outdated concepts, like
Yeah.
phlogiston in chemistry or
Uh.
vital force in biology,
Right.
our common sense understanding of the mind will eventually be superseded by a more precise and objective explanation.
So they're saying that folk psychology is basically pre-scientific,
In a way, yeah.
and it'll go the way of those other outdated ideas.
Right, that point to folk psychology's inconsistencies and limitations,
Okay.
its susceptibility to biases,
Right.
and its lack of a clear connection to underlying brain processes.
I can see how our intuitive understanding of the mind might not always align perfectly with the complexities of the brain.
Exactly.
But is it really possible to do away with these basic concepts? I mean, these seem so fundamental to how we interact.
It's a controversial view, for sure. Many argue that folk psychology, despite its flaws, is simply too ingrained in our thinking,
Right.
too essential for navigating the social world to be completely eliminated.
It's true. We need some way to understand and predict each other's actions,
Exactly.
even if it's not perfectly accurate.
Right. It might be more about finding a balance,
Okay, I like that.
acknowledging the limitations of folk psychology
Yeah.
while still recognizing its practical value in everyday life.
That makes sense. Okay, what about simulation theory? This one, from what I understand, questions whether we need a theory at all to understand others.
That's right. Simulation theory suggests that instead of applying a detached theoretical framework,
Uh-huh.
we understand others by mentally simulating their experiences.
Okay,
We put ourselves in their shoes,
right.
imagine their perspective,
Uh-huh.
and use our own minds as a model to generate predictions about their behavior.
So it's less about analyzing abstract concept like belief
Right.
and more about tapping into our own feelings and intuitions.
Exactly. It's a more embodied, experiential approach
Okay.
to understanding minds. It draws on our own capacity for feeling emotions, having desires, making decisions,
Yeah,
and uses that to simulate what might be happening in someone else's mind.
that makes sense. But if our own minds are the basis for understanding others, doesn't that raise questions about bias and accuracy? Like, can we truly understand someone whose experiences and values are really different from our own?
You've hit on one of the key challenges to simulation theory.
Yeah,
How do we account for the diversity of human thought and experience?
right,
If we're relying on our own potentially limited perspective as the model,
right.
it's a question that simulation theorists are still grappling with.
It seems like every theory has its strengths and weaknesses. Okay, what about the phenomenological critique? This one always makes me a little nervous because I feel like philosophical jargon can get pretty dense.
Don't argue, we'll keep it clear. Essentially, the phenomenological critique challenges the idea that our primary mode of social understanding is through analyzing mental states.
Okay,
It argues that theory actually distorts our actual experience of social interaction,
okay.
which is often much more direct, immediate, and embodied.
So instead of constantly trying to figure out what someone is thinking,
Right.
we're actually responding to their expressions, their tone of voice, their physical presence in a more intuitive way.
Precisely. Think about a simple conversation.
Okay,
We're not consciously running through a checklist of beliefs and desires.
right.
We're picking up on subtle cues, reacting to their energy, and engaging in this dynamic exchange
Right.
that go beyond simply attributing mental state.
It's like there's a level of understanding that happens almost unconsciously
Yeah.
through shared attention, empathy, a sense of connection that goes beyond simply reading someone's mind.
Exactly. The phenomenological critique highlights the importance of considering the lived experience of social interaction,
Yeah.
not just the cognitive mechanisms that might be involved.
This is all so thought-provoking. It's making me rethink how I approach my own social interactions, but we're not done yet, right? There are even more critiques of theory.
There are. Folk psychology pluralism, for example, argues that we use folk psychology for a variety of purposes, not just prediction and explanation.
Like what?
We also use it to justify actions, regulate behavior, build social bonds,
Right.
navigate moral dilemmas.
So it's not just about figuring out why someone did something,
Right.
but also about making sense of our own actions
Exactly.
and finding our place in the social world.
Precisely. Pluralists emphasize the diverse roles that folk psychology plays in our lives.
Okay.
From making moral judgments to coordinating actions to expressing empathy and understanding.
It seems like the more we explore folk psychology, the more complex and multifaceted it becomes. It's clearly not just about, like, cold calculating analysis.
It's not.
There's a whole web of social, emotional, even moral dimensions at play.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the role of stories.
Oh, right. Stories.
The narrative practice hypothesis argues that our understanding of minds is deeply shaped by the narratives we encounter
Uh-huh.
and the stories we tell about ourselves and others.
This reminds me of all those books I read as a kid, where I learned about different characters and their motivations, the consequences of their actions.
Right.
Were those stories actually shaping my theory of mind without me even realizing it?
It's certainly possible. Through narratives, we learn about different ways of thinking, feeling, and being in the world.
Yeah.
We see how beliefs and desires lead to actions,
Right.
and how those actions can ripple through social networks.
It's all connected.
It is. Stories provide us with this rich tapestry of examples and possibilities
I like that. A tapestry.
that helps us make sense of our own experiences and the minds of others.
It's amazing to think about how all these different perspectives, from the computational to the phenomenological to the narrative,
It's a lot.
are converging on this one fascinating question. How do we understand each other? I feel like my brain has expanded tenfold just as this conversation.
Mine too. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, no more.
There's so much more to explore, debate, and discover about the nature of folk psychology.
I think the big takeaway for me is that understanding other minds is not a simple process. It's not just about applying a single theory
Right.
or following a set of rules.
It's messy.
Yeah, it's a dynamic, multifaceted, ever-evolving process
Absolutely.
that draws on our experiences, our culture, our biology, even the stories we tell.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So listeners, we encourage you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep pondering the fascinating mysteries of the human mind.
That's what we'll be doing.
Because after all, it's this very ability to understand each other that makes us uniquely human. It allows us to create those rich and complex social worlds that we inhabit. Until next time, happy mind reading.